gentleman that was elected to the Canadian Federal Parliament building in 1949, the youngest member ever to be elected at that time. He went on to be the Defense Minister under Lester B. Pearson, the Transport Minister under Pierre Elliott Trudeau. He's also the chair of the Task Force for Housing Plan and Urban Development. I'm talking about the Honourable Paul Hellyer. Thank you, Paul, for joining me.
It's a pleasure.
You've written numerous books, and one of them, your latest book to come out, is called The Money Mafia. You know, if you take a look at right now, there's an article that just came out. It talked about Norway had a surplus of about $909 billion, and putting out 1.3 million barrels of oil a day. Canada has a deficit of $600 billion. Alberta's putting out 2.3 million barrels of oil a day. If we take a look at your book, The Money Mafia, if you want to talk from a Canadian standpoint, you're seeing the difference of almost $1.5 trillion difference from Norway to Canada.
Well, it's due to the system that we adopted in 1974. We had a different system from 1939 to 1974. In 1938, in Canada, there were no jobs, none. 1939, the war broke out, and pretty soon everyone was working either in the armed forces or building factories or making munitions. And you might ask, well, where did that money come from? Well, the easy answer is that the Bank of Canada printed it, P-R-I-N-T-E-D. And what happened was the government of Canada would give the bank a bond, and the bank would buy it for cash that they would print and deposit in the government's account and to be spent into circulation to pay the soldiers, sailors, and airmen, and to pay for the munitions. And the Bank of Canada the government would pay the Bank of Canada interest on the bond, but then, and here's the kicker, the Bank of Canada would give it back as dividends because we own the Bank of Canada. And in effect, that money was near zero cost money. And this is the system that we had from then until 1974. And it not only got us out of the Depression and helped win the war, but it helped to finance the St. Lawrence Seaway, the Trans-Canada Highway, the new airport terminals that we built in those years, and to help lay the foundation for one of the best social security systems in the world. So it was a great system. Well, then in 1974, the Bank of Canada, without any consultation with the Prime Minister or the Parliament, changed the system and started taking its orders from the Bank for International Settlements in Zurich, Switzerland. And one of the changes that came about as a result of that was that the BIS, as we call it, the Bank for International Settlements, said that central banks could no longer create money low-cost money for their governments. And we went along with that, apparently, and since then, we've been getting further and further in debt. And we had these two big recessions, which were both caused by the actions of central banks, the one in 1981-82, when thousands and thousands of people were put out of their jobs and thousands lost their houses and their farms and their businesses. And then again in 1991, when it lasted even longer. And so we had to run deficits in order to pay unemployment insurance and so on. And these deficits were rolled over into debt. And then we had to pay interest on that debt, which at the rates that were in effect in 81-82, about 22% at the highest, the debt doubled every 4 years. So we got ourselves in a lot of debt on which we've been paying interest ever since. And the report that I like to use of where we are now as a result is that from 1974, when we changed the system, to 2010-11, Canadians paid $1.1 trillion in debt, none of it which was really necessary. But this was simply because we let the Bank of Canada fall into the clutches of the international banking cartel that I refer to in my book as the money mafia. So this is a huge issue, and it really depends on whether it's resolved or not, whether there are going to be jobs and hopes for the young people who are unemployed today. And at the moment, there doesn't seem to be much hope. But as you know from my book, I'm starting a campaign to try and get the governments to adopt a policy similar, not the exact same, but similar to the one that we had from 39 to 74, and to create a lot of new money to get the economy back up and running, reduce unemployment by at least 50% in 2 years, and then to do what we did then, which was to share the money creation function between the Government of Canada and the private banks, instead of just giving the private banks a monopoly, which is what they have at the present time. No, unless we do this, we have no future, really. We'll just have high unemployment and a mediocre, moribund economy for as far ahead as you can see. So it's probably the most urgent issue in the world, and one which has to be attacked, and I'm hoping that this will be the year when we can get people's attention and have them try at least to understand why we should not have a private monopoly creating all of our money and then have to borrow it back from them, and why, if we used a little common sense, which seems to be in short supply in government circles everywhere, that we would have a future and be able to recover some of the lost ground and get on with our work.
1997, you formed the Canadian Action Party. Do you feel, looking at the political system right now, the NDP, the Liberals, the Conservatives, the Green Party, even Canadian Action Party, is there a way that we can form some sort of coalition to work with just a few of the parties to bring about the monetary reform that we desperately need here in Canada with the election coming up in 2015? Well,
I'm not optimistic on that one because I actually tried very hard for about a year to get the NDP, the Green Party, the Canadian Action Party, progressives from the Progressive Conservative Party, because that's when they're split and the reform was separate, and progressive liberals to form a new party to do just the kinds of things that you're talking about, because the Canadian Action Party had the best platform by far of any of the parties, and we thought it allows the parties to do the things that they promise but can't do because there's no money. And we came very close. I would say we came within, about a week or 10 days of pulling it off. But then at the very last minute, there was a breakdown in negotiations, and it didn't happen. So I'm not very optimistic, but at the same time, I'm sure that if the present government were defeated and either the NDP or the Liberals formed a minority government after the next election, that there would be cooperation to try and get some of the reforms made that are essential for Canada.
If you take a look at, as I was mentioning earlier, the wealth that Norway has compared to Canada, in the future, is there a possibility that there might be some sort of investigation to go on? Because not only is Alberta awash in oil, but all over Canada we have other resources, and it just doesn't add up to the government coffers. The money that should be coming in from royalties, it just doesn't seem to be there. Is there a possibility to get an investigation into that?
You can get an investigation, but investigations are not worth usually what you pay for them. Usually they result in a lot of good suggestions reflecting on past policies and things that are gone by. And then the report is put on the shelf and just collects dust. But what is necessary is to get some action and to change the system and to make the changes in the way things work that are essential for the future, not to look in the rear view mirror at this stage.
What would be some suggestions that you would have to help bring positive change in that?
The first and most important one is for the government to get into the money creation business, the most urgent. And it's been suggested, a group of economists or economic mavericks, some of us were economists, some weren't, made a suggestion to the government a couple of years ago that they direct the Bank of Canada to create $150 billion a year and split it equally between, put it in the federal government's coffers to be split equally between the federal government and the provinces, $75 billion each for 7 years, while we reinstated a system that we abandoned in 1991, and that is cash reserves for the banks, because at the moment they have no cash to back up their deposits. But they should have, and we were suggesting, still are suggesting, 34%. And it would take 7 years to do that at that rate of money creation, and it would solve nearly all of our problems in the money field because, for example, Ontario's share would be $38 billion, I think it was, if I remember correctly, which would put them in surplus rather than deficit and give them enough money to start financing of urban transportation systems, which are so desperately needed, which we talk about day and night and never do anything about because there's no money there to do it, and to start reducing taxes for single parents and all of the things that are so desperately in need of attention, and the money would be there to do it. So this is number one, and two things it accomplished. Not only would federal governments around the world, because it's a system that I think should be adopted worldwide, have enough money to balance their budgets at the federal level and the provincial level in Canada, or the state level in the United States, and the municipal level, without increasing taxes, and on the contrary of being able to reduce taxes, and there would be no further increase in debt. So that the United States, for example, wouldn't have to spend days arguing about increasing their debt limit every year, because it would stop going up and would actually start coming down. And this particular proposal that we made, which we called a new social contract between the Government of Canada and the citizens of Canada, was such that if we followed that, we would have enough fiscal flexibility to reduce our federal debt by probably, maybe 30 or 35% in a period of 7 years, so that our debt servicing would go way down, and we'd be able to either reduce taxes or increase benefits in proportion. So that's number one on the thing. And the other aspect of it, too, is that the most important issue in the world today is global warming. I mean, most urgent is monetary reform, but the most important is global warming. And 10 years ago, when I wrote a book entitled Light at the End of the Tunnel, I said we had 10 years to do something about it and to introduce clean energy worldwide. And now, 3 or 4 years past, I'm saying in my new book, The Money Mafia, and the subtitle is very important, A World in Crisis, which is right, the world is in crisis at the present time, that we have to try to change the system from oil to clean energy in 7 years. And people sort of blink and say, well, that's not possible, is it? And I said, well, of course it's possible if we did the same kind of thing that we did during World War II, but in reverse. So first of all, we'd have to get President Obama to declare that the technology for zero-point energy, clean energy in little boxes that will power a whole house or a car or whatever, in the open and available without high royalties, accessible to the people worldwide. And then secondly, to have the new monetary system so that governments had enough, what I call fiscal flexibility, to help subsidize the changeover from an oil-based system to a clean energy system. And this zero-point energy, which most of us on the inside, well, the inside a lot of people know exists, with that you can have a little box that you could use, and we would be able, and we have to, really replace the energy supply in every car, truck, boat, house, and airplane in the world in 7 years if we are really serious about saving the world for future generations. Because if we don't do something, it's going to continue to overheat, and already we're feeling the sort of fringe results of it with the huge storms we're getting and the unusual weather. And it's just going to keep getting worse if we don't do something about it right away. Now, in World War II, what we did, we took every car factory, every fridge factory, every stove factory, and converted them into making munitions.
So how many years do you feel it's going to take to gear the factories to start putting this out? Because they're starting to put fuel cell cars out in Japan. It's going to be available in Japan. United States can be available later this year, but that's not mass production. That's specially ordered vehicles that Toyota's putting out.
No, well, I'm talking about mass production of an entirely new technology, and in my opinion, it could be done in less than 12 months to make the change to get the factories geared up. But I didn't quite finish saying what now you take every factory that's making bombs to kill people, drones to blow up people, and all of the things that are going on that are dreadful and which have to end if we want to survive as a species, because we're kind of on the cusp of whether or not we're going to allow the cabal, which is in charge of the United States and much of the world, and has plans for a totalitarian new world order, because that's what they're really talking about. It's a repetition of what was going on in Germany in the 30s, and they even give it the same name with the New World Order, and we're going to have to abandon their plans and regain control of the United States, and then to start saving the world for future generations, and to take away the power from the cabal, which has it now, to try and capture the whole world, even if it means using atomic weapons, which is total insanity. There are a bunch of psychopaths involved in this plan, which involves, if necessary, using widespread atomic weapons, and it is so insane one dares not think about it if you don't want to lose your own sanity. And it's got to be changed, and it's got to be changed right away, or the future of our species is going to be in jeopardy. So this is what we have to do, is to, in effect, declare war on global warming and use the techniques that were used during World War II to win that war in reverse, and in the process to abandon war as a means of settling differences or empire building, which always seems to be under the covers, and to really work toward a world of peace and prosperity for everybody everywhere. And it's possible. We've got the know-how, we've got the wealth, we've got everything. If we just change the monetary system and changed our will from trying to set up another empire, even greater than any that has ever been created before, and started cooperating and not saying, we've got to remain number one and we've got to make sure the Russians and the Chinese don't ascend any higher, and just say, no, the goal will be cooperation with them, with everyone, to change the power system, the system for heating and so on, to something that's sustainable, and to change our whole outlook on life from one of control and greed, and instead to substitute an era of cooperation where every child everywhere, regardless of their race or color, would have enough to eat and clean water to drink, a shirt on his or her back, and enough basic education to test their mettle to see what they can contribute to the world, to the planet, and enough health care to enable them to survive to do that. And that's the kind of world that we can do, and we should be doing, and we must start doing if we're going to survive as a species. And it isn't a question of not being able to do it, it's just a question of getting the political will, the political leadership, to change their mindset from we want to be number one and we want to rule the world, and say we want to be number one in cooperation to make the kind of better world that we know is possible.
What kind of minerals will we have to look at to bring this new energy into being? Are there special minerals that need to be mined somewhere in Canada or another part of the world?
I don't think any new minerals are necessary. I think we have everything we need to do it. And the Americans have had the technology for a long while. There's Dr. Michael Wolff, who was worked in these secret areas in Nevada and New Mexico, areas 51 and S4 and others, and who had one of the highest classifications of anybody in the United States, said, well, I can't remember how long ago, but probably 10 or 15 years ago, that the Americans, in cooperation with the extraterrestrials that were working with them there, had created both cold fusion and zero-point energy. So it's been there and it's available, but the patents are secret. They're under, I think, private control, and that is going to have to be pried loose by presidential order and made available to the world. And I would hope that that could happen almost immediately. And it would be a great way for President Obama to sort of recover a legacy that he would be proud of, to create a legacy that would be proud of, is if he would lead this moral and spiritual revolution, which is what we're really talking about, and lead the world in the opposite direction to that which it has been following for the last 50 or 60 years, and a world of transparency instead of a world of lies, which started in the late 1940s, and which has been sort of the modus vivendi ever since, and still is the way that the world is working, or much of it.
And with this aging stockpile of nuclear weapons, and we're talking about the nuclear waste that's being produced by the nuclear plants, all this stuff is not, it takes many centuries to biodegrade until it becomes inert. Is there a technology out there, to your knowledge, that could actually help make this stuff inert a lot faster, so when it comes time for us finally to dismantle these weapons and move away from nuclear plants, that we're not passing this ticking time bomb, environmentally on to the future generations?
There's no technology that I know of to increase the half-life of atomic materials. It's just something that you have to try and put in a safe place, and is extremely controversial, as you know, because the possibility of leakage into huge water supplies like the Great Lakes is very great, and it's one of the most difficult problems that our leaders have to face in the immediate future.
And when you were the chair of the task force on housing, and we're talking urban development, looking at it right now, is there a way for us to help make the housing more affordable? It seems like the middle class has been priced out of the housing market right now here in Toronto. I know in Calgary that the prices are going down because the price of oil has gone down, but here in Toronto it's gone up.
I don't think there's any magic solution, but there are things, and part of this has been government policy. By agreeing to insure larger and larger mortgages, the banks have been able to be reckless in their appreciation, in their evaluations of houses. And so people could bid up the price of a house and get a larger and larger mortgage for it. And then the government would, through the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, insure this larger mortgage. But this is a policy that should be reversed, and there is a way, of course, of bringing housing prices down, and that is simply to increase the requirements for cash payments up front for the equity that is put in. So this is a question where government policy can make a difference. I guess the one thing that you would have to consider is having different policies for different areas and cities. because in some cases you wouldn't want to discourage building more houses. In other cases, you would want to maybe put a bit of a lid on it. And there are things that can be done on a regional basis. We don't like to do them that way, but they can be. And of course, there are other things that can be done. One of them recommended in the Task Force on Housing and Urban Affairs, and that was to have municipal governments develop land and put in the services, and then sell the land, the service lots, to the builders at a much cheaper price and without the huge markups that go if builders are able to do all of the development, and especially in a tight market. So there are things that could be done, but it would take a fresh look, I guess, at the recommendations we made half a century ago and see which ones are still valid. Some of them are. Some of them might have to be changed a little bit, and to try and see if they couldn't cool the market a little bit rather than waiting for another depression or recession when a lot of people would lose their houses and the prices would crash overnight instead of just sort of gently tapering off.
One point that you brought up in that report that you gave to the Parliament back in, I think, in 1968, and it talked about the moratorium of the destruction of older houses. I feel like you're trying to preserve Canada's history. You take a look at over the years how a lot of Canadian history has disappeared. Is there a way for us to finally step in and tell the government, look, we want to make sure that the history survives, so that way that the children coming up and their children can enjoy buildings that are 200-300 years old?
Well, I think it's just it's one more thing. This is the kind of issue where people can, if they mobilize and put enough pressure on governments, make change. There are lots of examples of this. It's just what's important to people and whether they're willing to take the time off to create the political pressure to do it.
And we're taking a look right now at here in Canada in regards to the Air Force, and they're getting the F-35 to replace the 18 CF-18s. Retired Major General Louis McKenzie has recommended that we revive the Avro Air, and he also said the F-35 that we'd be better off with surface-to-air missiles than over the F-35. What's your thought as, when you were a defense minister under Leslie B. Pearson, and you've looked at stuff happening over the years, what do you think that Canada's option could be for a more affordable aircraft that could replace the aging CF-18?
Well, I think something has to be or should be looked at. The F-35 is not a good airplane. It's an expensive airplane. As always, the flyboys want the best available, the latest technology. Interesting thing is this is not the latest technology. The Americans are peddling off on us something that is, in effect, out of date. The Americans have developed over the last 50 years flying machines, anti-gravity flying machines, which have all the same characteristics as the flying saucers that have visited our country from other realms. And they have weapons that are just miles, light years ahead of what we have been using. And here they are trying to peddle off these obsolete machines, both to their own Air Force and to ours and others. And it's all part of what General Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex, because they're trying to make markets for military weapons in order to make huge profits for the people who are in those businesses. And it's a tragedy that so much money is going into those areas. And as I was saying earlier, if we'd spend our time on doing these other things, we wouldn't have to, we wouldn't be so concerned about replacing obsolete airplanes with other obsolete airplanes. And as far as bringing back the Avro Air was concerned, that's a dream. I'm surprised. I wonder if the general was being serious or just making a little fun at the expense of someone. But that's something you can forget. And certainly the F-35 is not a good use of taxpayers' money. And if you have to have airplanes for the future, and you shouldn't have to have if you're going to start solving our problems by negotiation and diplomacy instead of by force, which has to be the new paradigm that we adopt worldwide. If we do that, why then you don't need to have new airplanes at all. So there are a lot of things that have to be taken into consideration here, but spending a lot of money on something that well, it's at least somebody in the Defense Department should know is out of date, and which can only be used against smaller countries that are even less well equipped, I think requires some very careful thought.
Well, thank you so much for your time there, Paul. You're truly a Canadian treasure, and thank you for all the things you've done and continue to do, because you're educating so many of us Canadians. You're showing us that we can make a difference, and just hopefully you'll keep doing this for years to come.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity, and my very best wishes to everyone everywhere, and especially veterans from all wars who have been willing to take the risk to preserve the freedoms and the kind of life that unfortunately is being eroded today, and somehow we've got to get together and work towards this new paradigm that I've been talking about.